Hello and welcome. My name is Jason Cooper. So today on Positive People with Positive Minds for Serenity Radio, I have a very special guest. Someone I've known for the last few years. He's helped me out in a few ways with my situation and that. So really, when we talk about positive people, I've been working in sales and marketing for the last 25 years, and what I've really noticed is some of the most successful people just have that edge, whatever that edge might look and feel like. They just have that positive outlook on life where they succeed and others fail, so they get through the tough times and they really sort of push through and build up their resilience, and they excel. And they sometimes they get no from the request that they say, but they just sort of rise above it and move forward. So, you know, without something that I've learned in my life is just to have a better and positive outlook. So that's why this show is so impactful and so empowering to all of the people. So my very special guest today is Dave Russell. Do you want to say hello?
Hello, Jason. How are you? Thank you very much for having me on your show. This is really exciting. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, I just want to give people a little bit of, like, you gave me a bit of blurb about you, so I'm going to talk about Dave Russell. Blurb is a formal financial markets trader turned into a mind coach. We're talking about mind coach. On my previous show, I had two other mind coaches, but they also work in slightly different area to Dave. He now teaches people to release more of their mind's potential in a positive way, which is awesome. He has individual and corporate clients, helping them to develop mental resilience, which is awesome, to operate at peak performance, which I like to do. He's also worked with Olympic and Paralympic athletes, if I can say it correctly, which is awesome. He's also a hypnotherapist, psychotherapist, master practitioner of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, and an expert of accelerated learning techniques, which is something that we're going to speak about in a while as well, because I'm fascinated with that. And maybe we can talk about how you do that, because that's also really important. And some people in the audience go, well, what is that? But I think you're going to excel in that and teach us how to do that, because I think that's an awesome. So just remind me in my questions later that we need to touch on that. So Dave is the holder of the Irish memory record. Luckily, he remembered today, so that was good. And for the most digits of a PI memorized, and teaches audience how to unlock human mind's infinite power for memory, to recall and learning to create competitive advantages in business. So he's also creator of Easy Ways to Better Grades, online accelerated learning program for students. So a lot of stuff. So Dave, again, thank you. That's your a little bit of an intro. So
what a lovely introduction, even if I did write it myself.
Hopefully it came all organic, and like you've also wrote a series of audiobooks for children struggling with mental health and challenges. That is something that we want to touch on as well, because my kids have gone back yesterday. They don't say that they've been struggling, but you know, sometimes I think they had. But I think that's due to the last 5 months of this crazy worldwide situation that we have. We've all had it in one shape or form. But, you know, Dave, first question really for you is, tell me about who you are and your journey from when you were young and into your business and corporate world and your career, because I'm really intrigued by your backstory before we get into what you do and what you do now and everything else, because I think it's really important to tell people a little bit more about where you've come from, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, I suppose my life has kind of gone about 180 degrees in the last decade or so. Now, as you said, I'm working as a mind coach. I'm working with people, helping them to release more of the mind's potential. Right now, when I say that, what that really means is understanding how to get your mind to do certain things, or understanding how to stop your mind doing things that you don't want it to do. And it's not what I always did. If you go back to, I suppose, 1997, I started a career in financial markets, and I worked for an international bank as a trader, and I traded foreign exchange, and I traded bonds, and I traded many other different financial instruments on behalf of the bank that I was working for. And this was basically, taking positions. It's like gambling on the financial markets in very large sizes. And you're gambling with the bank's money, and it can be extremely pressurized environment to work
of course.
in. Sometimes you win, and if you do, you get well paid, but other times you don't win and you lose the bank's money and the shareholders' money, and it's not looked on too favorably. So it's a very high pressure environment that you work in, constantly moving, dynamic financial markets. And I really enjoyed it to begin with. I got a buzz out of it.
Of course, you would.
Yeah, and I kind of suppose I became addicted to it for many years, and so it's great to get paid for something that you're kind of addicted to and can do well. But it had an effect on me mentally, kind of being under this constant pressure and stress, and it triggered for me what was first obviously stress that became chronic stress and then turned into anxiety for me. And it was probably an anxiety that I thought that I had gotten rid of, anxieties that I would have had when I was much younger, and they came back with all this pressure and stress that I was under. And it started to affect my performance professionally as well. And it started to affect my my relationships, my friendships, everything about me. I wasn't the same happy individual that I would have been in the past. I didn't like how I was feeling mentally and physically, because obviously we've got the mind-body connection. How you feel mentally, directly impacts how you feel physically. One thing led to another, and I decided that it was time to get out of financial markets after a good number of years, after nearly 15 years of financial markets.
That's a long time, really. 15 years. Was it with the same?
No, a number of different institutions, but always in the financial markets. And I kind of went on a bit of a journey after that to really try and understand what was going on for me, and ultimately what I could do about it. And that's what kind of led me down the route of learning NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, going down the route of hypnotherapy, psychotherapy. I started to learn more and more about how the brain works, how to, as I say, stop it doing the things that you don't want it to do and get it to do more of the things that you do want it to.
Of course.
Ultimately, there's nothing new under the sun. There's just a different way of looking at things, different perspectives. As a result of the experience that I had and the journey that I went on, I started to develop a certain perspective. I started to develop a certain way of looking at things, a certain way of understanding things, and a certain way of trying to easily and simply communicate these things to other people. As a result of that, I started to work with people who, like me, had been struggling with stress and anxiety. And I found that the journey that I went on, I was able to bring them on a similar journey. That's a journey of understanding what's going on in your head, why that's happening, and what you can actually do about it. So I've been working with people with stress and anxiety now since 2000 and 2012. That's 9 years at this stage. It's extremely rewarding. You are basically freeing people up from a lot of their mental chains that they have, which can give them a new lease on life. So I went from being that person who was all consumed with my day-to-day job, chasing the book, as they say, to 180 degrees from that. Now I work with people trying to help them live more happier and fulfilled lives.
Can you tell me something? Because I want people that are listening to this right now, you went through something that was very successful career. You made lots of cash along the way, which is wonderful. But money's not everything in the world. What was that point? Because I want people to really understand, if they're going through it right now, what was that sort of moment, that trigger, that anchor point that sort of changed everything? That's when you had that successful career, but all of a sudden something happened inside. So you can just talk through that process so they can get that, and then we'll talk about other things, how you overcame that. Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's hard to put my finger on exactly one. There were a number of them, and there were looking back on it, with what I now realize were a number of different panic attacks in various different situations. I remember having a panic attack on September 11, 2001, as I sat in the trading room that I was in, and I watched what was unfolding 3,000 miles away from me. And the heart, now everybody would have had this to a degree, but the heart beating, the shortness of breath, the sweating, that kind of fear, that wanting to escape as you're just watching something unfold on the TV. That was one thing that I actually remember very clearly, having a panic attack around that. I remember a couple of years later standing in front of a large audience giving a presentation. I was talking to a room full of about 400 fund managers in the States, and I had been invited to speak on a panel, and there was 4 of us on a panel, and we were each to give our speech on our specific area of expertise. But there'd been a bit of a mix-up, and of the 4 people, there were 2 people that were to speak on the topic that I was meant to speak on, rather than just me, and I was the last person to go. And the person before me stood up and he gave a speech, and he basically made about 9 of the 10 points that I was going to be making in my presentation. I then stood up in front of this room at the podium and decided that I had to try and talk on a topic, fill in the gaps, talk on a slightly different topic, make up some points that hadn't already been made. I remember finding myself very, very dry throat. I reached for a glass and I reached for a bottle to fill it up, to just wet my whistle before I started to speak. My hands were shaking so much that the glass and the bottle started rattling together right in front of the microphone. It's reverberated around the auditorium.
I bet you wish that was a pint of beer or something like that.
I then went and put the glass back down on the table. Didn't realize I'd put it slightly awkwardly on top of a pile of papers that were there. It tipped over, rolled off the thing, and smashed onto the floor. I don't really remember much of what I said in the next 10 to 15 minutes. Thankfully, it was actually to an American audience, because there were questions and answers at the end, and I didn't really get too many of the questions directed at me until one man sticks his... One man puts his hand up at the back, and he just says, and then the microphone goes to him. He says, "I just like to say to the Irish guy," he says, "we don't care what you say, we just love your accent." And the entire room erupted into applause.
Wow. I bet your mind went, thank God for that. Thank God for that. I'm delighted for that.
So the panic that I went through that on that day really stuck with me, as it did over a number of... And the thing was, I used to say to myself, one of the most... destructive things possible. At first, it doesn't sound like it's destructive, but when we understand what it does to it, it really is. And I looked back and I said the same thing on that day, and I said the same thing on many other occasions, whether it was standing up in front, speaking in front of people, or other situations that I was in that I didn't handle well, and I had that physical reaction.
So was it almost like if the next few times that you were standing up, you were almost going back to that?
I'm reliving it.
You're reliving it.
Not reliving that one. I was reliving all of them. So they were compounding. I was stacking these negative experiences on top of each other and reliving it. And the thing that is the most dangerous thing that I was saying to myself is, that's just the way I am.
Yeah.
That's just the way I am. Because as a result of saying that and saying it so often, I believed it.
Yeah, of course.
And when you believe that, the danger with that is you don't do anything about it.
Yep. It keeps repeating.
Yeah. And I remember watching an excellent speaker in a similar situation, and the seed of thought was planted when I kind of said, what does he do differently?
So we're going to come back in a few moments on that point with Dave Russell, because I want to welcome back to Jason Cooper. We're positive people with positive minds, and today my very special guest is Dave Russell, the mind coach. And if you like this and you like more episodes like this, please tune into more of this, because we're speaking to some wonderful people that are sharing their experiences and what they do in their roles and their jobs and their careers to date. So, Dave, you left me on a cliffhanger, and I want to find out more now. What did you actually do? Tell me.
So, as I sat there, and I that seed of thought was planted, which is, what is he doing differently that I don't do?
Okay.
Right. So I was in similar situations, and I went into a blind panic. Whereas you got somebody up here who comes across as calm, cool, collected.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't I be like that? How can I be like that? What is he doing that I'm not doing? Okay. Now, this conversation is not about public speaking or whatever. So it's not really about what specifically he was doing that was different. It's the question that I asked, and it was a fundamentally different question, which became, what's he doing? Rather than sitting there going, I wish I could do that, or I can't do that, I'm no good at this, or, that's just the way I am, I'm bad at this type of thing. It became, what's he doing? Mm-hmm. So it was a understanding that we have strategies for everything. Everything that we do in our life, whether it's getting up in the morning and brushing our teeth, or whether it's public speaking, whether it's how we go about our job, we have a strategy for achieving everything that we want to achieve in our life.
Dave, tell me how you would do that. So for people that are listening to this now, that have that similar wobble at the stunt, they're on the stage and the whole world is looking at them, and you almost feel like everyone's looking at you and you're quaking in your boots. What can you do differently? What can you say to someone right now to say, like, everything is all right? What advice could you give someone now on that?
Yeah, well, I'm going to actually answer that in a very roundabout way and slightly differently, if you'll permit. Because the most important thing that you can actually start with, there's no point in me saying, you go use this technique or go do this and it'll calm everything down. Because the reality is, you'll go and try that, it won't work, and then you'll say, this stuff doesn't work, it's no good, right? And then you'll either say, it doesn't work, it's no good, or my situation is so bad that it won't work for me, right? And what you'll end up doing is you'll end up staying stuck where you are, because you'll think that there's no way out of it for you. So rather than talk specifically about things that you can do in that situation, the most important thing to understand is this idea that we have strategies for doing everything. And I had a strategy for being a bad public speaker. And I was employing that strategy, and I became really good at being a bad public speaker because I perfected that strategy.
Oh, that was it. Well done for that.
And it wasn't until I understood that's what I was doing, and I sought out people who had the skills to teach me the strategies to become a good public speaker, that things in that arena changed. But let's not just limit it to that. The idea of public speaking, it is for a lot of people. It's a massive fear.
It's the number one fear, isn't it? Apparently, public speaking in front of a large audience or an audience, even if it's to your family, it's the internal thing that goes on. So
Absolutely. If I say like it's the number one fear, it's actually greater than the fear of death. The fear of death is number two, and the fear of public speaking is number one. So that's what they say. Like if at a funeral, most people would prefer to be the guy in the box than the guy standing up giving the speech.
Wow, that's quite an achievement to get to number one, really, isn't it?
So I actually then realized that not only was I employing a certain strategy to be a bad public speaker, but I was also generally employing strategies to become stressed and strategies to become anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And I was employing those strategies in certain situations. And the thing about it was I did not know how to employ any other strategy. I'd been doing these things for so long that they have become automatic habits, and automatic habits that you have not even conscious of having. And there's a great simple test that I do with people, and it works with about 90 to 95% of people. So hopefully you're going to fall into that category to demonstrate the subconscious habits that we have. So if I, and I'll talk you through this to, so your audience listening to this can actually do it at the same time. And it's very simple, right? What I want you to do is I want you to fold your arms nicely and comfortably. So just fold your arms nicely and comfortably across your chest the way you normally do, and just feel how nice and comfortable that is. Now have a look down and see, which arm do you cross on top? Is it your left arm or is it your right arm? For me, it's my left arm. Now, this has got nothing to do with being left-handed or right-handed. I'm right-handed. I cross my left arm on top. Other right-handers do the opposite. Others do the same, and the same with left-handers. Now, take that apart again. And now, remembering which arm you crossed on top, I want you to cross your arms again, but now with the opposite arm on top.
Yep.
How does that feel?
Not as comfortable.
Kind of awkward, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does feel a little bit awkward. Yeah,
kind of awkward. Now, for some people that be listening to this and trying this at this time, they'll be looking at their arms and they'll kind of feel like these are somebody else's arms.
Yeah,
because it'll just be so uncomfortable and so
unnatural.
Like
you sleep on your arm and it goes dead, and you know you feel like you've got a different arm. It goes in your arm, but almost that sort of feeling.
And what it's actually done is in your body, it's created some mild stress and tension in your body and in your brain, and that's just from crossing your arms. Now take them apart again and just fold them again naturally.
Yep.
And what you find is that stress and that tension immediately disappears and eases. Now, up until this point, you probably never looked down and checked which arm crossed over on top. It wasn't important. It's not significant. But it's a subconscious habit that you have, and it's a subconscious habit you have because you've done it all that way for most of your life. Now we have those type of habits that are ingrained throughout our life that run our life effectively. So we have habits not just of how we fold our arm, but we've habits of how we think. We have habits of how we act. We have mannerisms. I know that I have mannerisms when I speak. Hand gestures that I use that have become habits over the years. And if we think about it, everything is a habit. So there was one fundamental difference between the do yourself and myself in the way that we speak, and that's the accents that we have.
Yeah, that's very, very different. Yeah, because I have a pronounced English accent. So I think some people think I'm Australian. I don't know why, but I get that. But you have a sort of a calming Irish accent, but it's not thick Irish accent.
But here's the thing, and I wonder if you or your audience have ever thought about it this way. Your accent, the way that you speak, is just a habit. Your accent is a habit, and it's a habit that was developed when you were very young because of the people that you were surrounded with, and they spoke and they pronounced words in a certain way, and that became your linguistic habit, your tonal habit. It's just a habit, like everything else in our lives, and we can change it. And you see throughout history, you see throughout particularly the entertainment industry, you have people that change their accents because they will get a better job or they'll get better roles in films if they're able to speak in a certain way. But again, this is another thing that is just habits. So we have habits all throughout our life. Anything from folding our arms to the way that we speak, to the way that we think. And we can have thinking habits that trigger our stress and our anxiety. And some of those thinking habits can be conscious. A lot of them are subconscious. So we don't even know that we're doing them. So part of the way when I'm working with people is starting to make them conscious of the unconscious. So making people, because in order for you to change something, a lot of times you have to kind of take it out of there and have a look at it. You don't realize that you're doing things. You don't realize that you have a certain mental habit that you're falling into, and that mental habit is creating your stress and your anxiety. So it's giving people the tools to be able to dissect that to a degree. And then once they can dissect it, they can say, right, well, now that I know I'm doing that, now that I know that I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's generating stress for me, what happens if I go 1, 2, 5, 7, for example? You know, when I do that, when I consciously change my thought process in this way, I feel a lot calmer. Okay, well, what do I have to do? Well, now I have to take that conscious habit and I have to make that subconscious. How do I do that? Well, a lot of it is just practicing doing that, catching us when we're not doing it, and employing the new strategy. And then when you do that, what you want to do is you want to go from having that, you've taken the unconscious, you've made it conscious, you've now changed that into a new, more effective conscious habit, and you're now making it subconscious again.
Because there's also habit stacking as well. So the stuff that you do on a regular basis, like you go to bed at 10 o'clock and then you have a habit after that you want to install, or you have a cup of coffee in the morning. You have that hippie tea, don't you? I seem to remember. So when you have a coffee or hippie tea, you have something else afterwards, which can, whatever it might be, I will have a coffee, then I will go for a walk. And stack it that way. It's called habit stacking.
Yeah, so, and you can have positive habit stacking. You can have negative habit stacking. One of the things that I used to do, I used to run a stop smoking seminar for groups of people. And one of the reasons, as with all of the things that I do, whenever I focus on a certain area, it tends to be because I've had a challenge in that area that I've managed to overcome myself. And so I'm going to say, right, well, I've been through that journey. I've been through that experience. What were the learnings? What were the fundamental things that, what are the strategies that need to be employed in order for somebody else to get the same results out of it? And one of the reasons that I used to run these seminars is because I was a very heavy smoker.
Really?
And yeah, I used to smoke I'd smoke about 30 a day. Now yes. And this tended to be at the same time, obviously, that I was extremely stressed. So this is one of the ways that I'd manage my stress would be through smoking. But then it was that negative habit stacking. I'd have a cigarette, but nearly always then when I'd have not nearly always, a lot of time when I'd have a cigarette, I'd need to have something sugary afterwards. So it was either a sugary coffee or sugary tea or a can of Coke or something like that. So I'd have that. Then I'd need to have something, I'd feel hungry after that. So I was smoking, and then I was loading up on sugar, and then I was eating more food. I was starting to become, as a result, as you can imagine, that's not the healthiest of lifestyles. And while I was stressed as well, I wasn't sleeping well. So I'm smoking, taking a lot of sugar, eating a lot of food, not sleeping very well. And naturally as well, when you're doing all of these things, drinking comes into it as well. So it's probably drinking a little bit too much. So doing all of these things, which obviously meant that my lifestyle not being very healthy, the body wasn't very healthy. So I'm putting my body under stress. So now my body is under stress, which creates the exact same sensations in your body as the mental stress. So now I'm feeling stressed because I'm smoking, drinking, taking sugar, eating too much, not sleeping. I'm feeling stressed. So what is it that I do in order to stop feeling stressed?
I'm actually starting to feel terrible myself.
I smoke, I drink, I take sugar. I don't. So negative habit stacking, and you got this downward spiral, you know? we need to start to realize a lot of all those patterns we're setting up in subconsciously for me. Now, if somebody was to walk along and tell me, hey, by the way, you know, you're probably smoking a bit too much, you're probably drinking too much because you're eating a lot of sugar, or you want to cut back on the old carbs there, you know, I'd kind of go, really?
Yeah,
that's just who I am. Just
yeah,
let me be me. You do you, I'll do me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'll stay stuck.
And you're very welcome, everyone that is listening. And I hope you're really thoroughly enjoying Positive People with Positive Minds. But again, when we talk about positive, you know, we're not talking about these big cloud munchers going up there and the world is, way fantastic, great, wonderful, incredible. And, you know, let's be real, that doesn't happen. Like we do need to understand what's going on around us to actually have those internal thoughts and internal language patterns, which is good for us. And we discussed a little bit before that about habits and how they work negatively, because we discussed about the negative impact on that, and how if you're telling someone to lose weight or do this, that, and the other, that's not the right sort of language to do. You almost have to meet them in their world and really understand what's going on inside them. So Dave would actually, before I rudely interrupted him, he was actually going to tell us a little secret about that. And then we're going to discuss a little bit more about the other areas that Dave works in.
Yeah, well, I suppose rather than a secret, it's just it's this concept of understanding that we actually have these subconscious habits, these subconscious strategies that we're running that that we don't realize are negatively impacting our lives, negatively impacting our mental health. So the first step really has to be with that question: what do I want? What do I want to achieve? And if if you're a heavy smoker and you want to stop smoking, if you're a heavy drinker and you want to stop drinking, if you're overweight, or if you're just, you just want to be happier, right? You need to start with that question: what's my goal? Where do I want to get to? And it might be a short, medium, long-term goal. It doesn't matter. Where do I want to get to? And then say, right, well, is what I'm doing now, is that actually helping me to achieve what it is that I want to achieve? And if it's not, we got to look around and we start to ask the questions. Well, okay, who's achieving what I want to achieve? Maybe we have a family member, maybe we have a close friend that we can talk to. Say, let's take happiness, for example. You don't seem to be very stressed. You seem to be quite happy and easygoing all the time. Do you not get stressed out about X, Y, and Z? Do you not get stressed out about this epidemic that we're all living under? And they go, not particularly. And I said, well, why is that? Well, this is because I know blah, 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 blah. They'll start to, if we listen very carefully, they'll start to give you little hints with respect to how their mind works. Now, this is not necessarily about the facts, right? This is about understanding the strategy. So somebody is, kind of go, well, what do you know? Do you not get stressed out about all the news that you hear about all of the cases on a daily basis? Blah, blah, blah. And they go, well, no, I don't really look at the news that often, right? Now, this is not about should you look at the news, should you not look at the news. This is kind of starting to make some connections. And I say, right, well, if I'm not looking at the news every day, then I'm not necessarily going to be as exposed to stressful triggers as I am at the moment. Okay, there's a strategy. So we're starting to understand specific strategies that help other people to cope with it. Because the only difference between the person who is happy and the person who is sad, depressed, stressed, and anxious are the mental strategies that they are employing.
Isn't that, if I remember rightly, it's modeling behavior, not going up and down the catwalk and this, that, and the other, as we all have done in our past, but it is modeling the strategies of that positive person that has a good outlook in life or whatever it might be, and then almost the imprinting over to the other person so they can understand that strategy that could work for you. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. It is. Yeah, it is modeling. I tend to, when I talk about these things, I try and make them nice and simple, take away all of any sort of technical words about it. But ultimately, yeah, that's it. It's modeling. It's saying, okay, what are the strategies that are working for certain people, and make some weird or wild comparisons, and you have somebody like, say, Usain Bolt, who can run the 100 meters in
9 seconds or whatever
9
it is.
point blah, right? And you say, well, there's Dave Russell from 15, 20 years ago.
No chance.
And I go, I want to run the 100 meters in under 10 seconds, or under 20 seconds probably. Under 30. I want to run 100 meters today at some stage.
Yeah.
And you go, right, well, okay, what strategy are you employing, Dave? What's your diet like? Well, I eat a lot of refined sugars, McDonald's. Okay. Alcohol intake? Yep. I do.
Yeah, I get drunk beforehand. Yeah.
So tell me, do you smoke? Oh, only about 30 a day. Yeah. Okay, Grant. What about exercise? No, not doing any of that. What about training? Not doing any of that. No. Hey, did you get good sleep? Nope. Okay. Now we see a fundamental flaw in your strategy, Dave. So it's never going to happen, no matter how much you dream about it, wish it, hope for it, sit down, visualize it. Unless fundamentally things change and you employ a different strategy, you're not changing from where you are today.
I totally agree. Question I want to ask you, Dave. Now you've got that husky voice going on. I want to understand, and we touched on it in the introduction, is we spoke about the memory techniques, and I'm sure the audience listening now would, like, my memory is incredibly bad at some stages, and you gave me some really wonderful strategies to actually improve on that. But you became an Irish champion of memory and memory techniques and this, that, and the other. Explain this and go through a process so the audience can have a better memory, because it's massively important for memory in situations, presentations, books, or whatever it might be, just to know exactly how to have a really good strategy for that. So I really want to hear more.
Sure. The funny thing about it, actually, and I've been thinking a lot of this recently, is how all these things are connected. I actually see it as a continuum. What I mean by that is, on one side of this continuum, we've got the stress and anxiety, and on the other side of it, we've got got memory techniques. And what this is about, and I one of my great mentors was the late Tony Buzan, who unfortunately died last year. He was the inventor of mind mapping. He also taught me memory techniques, among other things. And his two words when it came to how the mind works, how the brain works, it's by imagination and association. And particularly, he always applied this to mind mapping. He always applied this to memory techniques. So, when it comes to there's an exercise that I do with people whenever I'm doing a conference, or when I'm talking in public about these things, and it's a simple technique. I won't run through it now because it takes a couple of minutes. I don't want to waste it, but it's a technique for helping people to remember all of the planets in the solar system in order. And what it does is it engages the principles of imagination and association. And it was a technique that was taught to me by Tony Buzan. And it's those key things of imagination and association. We are very visual people. I know we obviously use various other senses, whether it's a sense of touch or sense of our sense of hearing particularly, but we're very visual people. And the one simple example of that is for me to pick a random word out of the English language, of all the thousands of words of English language that there are. I'm going to pick a random word. And when I say this word, I want you to just, and your listeners, just to recognize what it is that you experience, what happens, right? So let's just say, for example, Swan.
Swan.
Right?
On?
Swan. Right?
Okay, got it.
Swan. Now, what happens? For most people, what happens is they get a nice picture of a swan.
Yeah.
Immediately, like that. Now, I could have picked absolutely any word that there was. I said swan because it's staring at me across the room there is actually a one of my daughter's teddies, and it happens to be a swan.
Oh, lovely.
But there you swan. Image of a swan pops into your head.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's probably, how long did that take?
Seconds.
Instantaneous.
Yeah.
Instantaneous. Bing! Of all of the thousands of words that I could have chose, boom, a picture. So your imagination at work. Maybe you actually associated that swan. Maybe you just saw a picture of a swan. Maybe you saw a swan's head. Maybe you saw the entire swan. Maybe you saw a swan in water. Maybe you had a picture of the last time that you saw a swan. It was on a lake. It was in the sea. It was on a river. It was whatever. Right? So you start to associate. What do you associate with the swan? You might say they associate the feathers. You might associate the last place that you saw it. So this is our visual memory is instantaneous like that. Now we can use that for good, or we can use that for bad. When I say use it for bad, right? When we visualize when we're in stressful situations or are about to be in stressful situations, we do exactly the same thing. When we think about public speaking, at a certain time in my life, when I thought about public speaking, what would happen? I'd get images of that time when I was standing up on stage, not knowing what to say in front of a large audience, spilling my water, making a holy shocking mess of it.
Yep.
And all of the things that I associated with that. So I have the imagination, I have the association. What do I associate with that? I associate the panic attack. I associate the breathing. I associate the heart rate. I associate the sweating. The horrible, uncomfortable feelings. And that's what I associate. So we've got the imagination and the association. So that's it working for bad, working for evil. I can also now, when I think about it, I can use the same thing to work for good. Because I've now had so many experiences of standing up in front of people, in front of large audiences, and it going well. Now when I've used that visualization, I associate it with all of the positive experiences that I've had, all of the times that it has gone well, all of the times when I've been asked tricky questions and been able to give an answer to those questions, how I've handled certain situations, all of the feelings that gave me, what I associated with those thoughts and those memories, all the feelings that gave me that makes me strong and confident. So that's using it for good in that situation. But also that can be used from a memory point of view. So we can use our imagination and our association in order to remember anything that we want to remember. Now that can be the order of the planets in the solar system. It can be the number, it can be a random series of numbers, as in, the pi sequence, right? It can be anything that we need to learn from work, from college, from a school point of view. And what we do is we use our imagination and we use our ability to associate in order to remember whatever it is that we want to remember. And it becomes incredibly powerful. We increase the power of our memory exponentially. And when we increase the power of our memory exponentially, we increase our knowledge and our understanding of it exponentially. And when we do that, it fundamentally improves the way that we perform, either in life, in exams. If you think that if you thought, I can understand, remember, and understand the integration between all of the things that I learn in school, and I can easily reproduce that when I need to, how much better would you perform at exam time?
Absolutely phenomenally, by the sound of it. Look,
not only how much better would you perform, but how much less stressed would you be about the concept of sitting in an exam? Much less stressed, wouldn't you? And the thing is, when we're stressed, one of the first things that tends to go is our cognitive functions. So we need to be less stressed when we're sitting exams. So if we can manage our stress and we can apply techniques that allow us to expand our ability to learn, to understand, to take in information, and to reproduce it, how good
Dave,
would that be?
that would be absolutely phenomenal. Dave, we could probably do this for another 45 minutes or so, or an hour or so, and just keep on talking and talking, because you come up with, I didn't cover what I wanted to cover, or all the points that I wanted to cover, because there's so much rich stuff that you've given us, which is really impactful. So I'm delighted with that. So really, thank you so much. So Dave, can people find out about you?
Yeah, well, the best way to get me is through my website, www.themindcoach.ie. I'm also active on Facebook, The Mind Coach, Dave Russell, The Mind Coach. You'll find me there as well. Yeah, and if you go onto my website, you'll actually find a number of my products available as well. I've two primary ones that for the adult audience. One is Anxiety No More, the 3 pathways approach, which helps people to overcome stress and anxiety in their lives. And the other one, which is very briefly touched on there, is Easy Ways to Better Grades, which started off very much as something that was aimed towards students, which was to develop their develop accelerated learning skills, but has had as much take up by people in professional positions, because these skills are they're skills for life rather than just skills for school and for learning. So for your adult audience, they're two things that would be very interesting for. Now, the other thing, though, also, and you touched on it briefly, is I've written a series of audiobooks for children, a series of characters who help to teach children various different mental strategies and techniques for dealing with stress and anxiety. Since the beginning of COVID-19, I've actually I've made those free on YouTube.
Wow.
for anybody, just as my way of contributing to helping the mental health of our youngest and most vulnerable. And that can actually be found if you go the website for that is tumblesthebear.com. tumblesthebear.com. So if you go on to tumblesthebear.com, if you have kids, particularly in the age group of 4 to 10 years old, that are struggling with stress and anxiety, go on to tumblesthebear.com and you'll be able to access all of those stories there for free.
Excellent. That is wonderful. And Dave, it's been a pleasure and really good to catch up with you as well. And we won't make it so long next time. So again, appreciate that. Today you've been listening to Jason Cooper from Serenity Radio, for positive people with positive minds that have an interesting story to tell. Appreciate that. Have a great day, everyone.